We're going to go ahead and get started. You are at the Diligent Efforts to Search for and Engage Relatives session. Thank you for being here. My name is Sandy Berger, and I'm the field manager for Klamath and Lake counties.
And I'm Molly Johnson, and I am field manager for Umatilla, Morrow, Union, Wallowa, and a couple of boards in Marion County. I support about 21 board members.
That's a lot.
I'm so happy to say that.
Since this is a session about relatives, we thought we would just begin by telling you just a little bit about our family and why family is important to us. My family grew up in the Portland area. My husband and I have 2 children. My son is a junior at Western Oregon University, and my daughter, Casey, is 19. She goes to Portland State. We have a large extended family, and so I was very fortunate to grow up around an extended family that we're very close to. And my history is child advocacy. I've worked with both CASA, and now I get to work with CRB, which I love, and I love working with volunteers. I'm so thankful for what you guys do, so thank you.
And I also come from a large and involved family. I guess I won't hide behind the podium. A large and involved family. I have 3 adult sons. I have parents I'm kind of caring for. I have lots of brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, 2 fabulous grandchildren I have a lot of fun with. And I'm kind of curious, when you all are here at this conference for this weekend, how much communication are you still having with your families? Checking your phones? Yeah. Calling, texting? Yeah.
So why my kids aren't texting me.
That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. On our lunch, I checked my cell phone and I had 22 messages, all from family, because I have a niece who was in a competitive run today, and the one message was a video with everybody cheering her on and passing the finish line, and then everybody in the family is responding to her, and yay. So it's really fabulous that we have the opportunity to stay connected with our families. We know our relatives, we're in connection with them.
So in this session today, we're going to talk about the advantages of relative placement. You guys will hear about federal law, Oregon law, and child welfare policy as it relates to searching for and engaging relatives. And we'll also talk about how Oregon defines a relative, so what child welfare looks at when they decide who a relative is. And then Molly is going to talk about how the relative search, how that relates to the CRB findings that you make. But before we get more into that, we thought we would do a little activity since this is the end of the day, and we thought it'd be fun for you guys all to get up. Have you heard of the program called Family Find? Okay, great. So you know that they are very successful at identifying relatives for foster children. So what we are asking you to do, you see these flip charts up on the wall on both sides. There's one over here on this wall that says 57. There's one in the back that says 92. On the other side, we have one that says 125, and in the front here it says 200. Go ahead and go stand by the flip chart of the number that you think is the closest to the average number of relatives that they find for foster children.
So stand up, go stand in front of the number.
Okay.
That is interesting.
So there's definitely a lot of good guesses. So what they have found based on the broad definition of relatives is that they find on average 200 relatives for each foster child.
Woo! Take a prize. Not the whole thing. Yes.
All right, thank you.
This is true. Okay, so Molly's going to do an icebreaker activity with you guys.
Yeah. So.
That's a national statistic put out by Family Find, the Family Find model, when they go and do an extensive family tree research. That's the Family Find program. Yep.
Right. Right. So on your table you have a dice. We would like you all to take turns rolling that dice, and whatever number the dice falls on, that's how many descriptions of yourself we want you to give to your table. And include something with your family. You can include if you're a CRB member or a CASA, what county, that could be 2. Well, actually, do that at a minimum. And then just include something with your family that you would like to share with your table. Your lucky number. You have 5 minutes? 5 minutes?
Oh, we actually have 12 minutes total for that.
Do we want them to report? Share anything? No.
I don't want to alarm you, but I think we might be having a problem with the volume again. Okay, so are you ready to show them the video viewing worksheet that they're going to pull out?
Do you want me to stop it?
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Did you guys all have a chance to say something about yourselves? Okay, great. So what we have now, we have a 17-minute clip of a video that was made by Portland State University and Child Welfare on engaging relatives. It's a really great video. And what we're going to have you do is, Molly has a worksheet here that we'll have you pull out of your blue folder.
It's in your folder. The title is Video Viewing Worksheet. The double-sided. All you want to do is just kind of fill this out as you're listening to the video.
So yeah, go ahead and follow along while you're watching the video, and then try to answer those questions on the worksheet, and then we'll review them after.
And there's prizes. Throughout the whole hour, there's prizes.
When a child is placed in the foster care system, relative connections can play a major beneficial role. Being connected to their family, knowing who their family is, where they are, and how to contact them can provide a child with opportunities they may not otherwise have as a foster child. Relative connections provide children with a sense of belonging and unconditional support. This speaks to the child's security and knowing they are part of a larger family system and members of a family they will be connected to for life regardless of any other circumstances. Unconditional support is critical for children of all ages. Family connections also provide children with an identity and a sense of self. Family connections give children a sense of who they are and where they came from. This can help define them as individuals. Relatives may provide for a child's practical needs. Relatives usually have the willingness and capacity to help, but we must be willing to ask. They may be able to assist with transportation, supervision of visits with parents, and a variety of other tasks that often fall upon the caseworker. Connections with family can give children a sense of normalcy. Caseworkers in the room, consider community events you may have attended for the children on your caseloads. Choir concerts, basketball games, school plays, birthday parties, graduations. Imagine how it might feel for a child to also have a relative or close family friend attend these important life events. Finally, working with relatives can help children with resiliency and an opportunity to recover from grief and loss. National research has underlined the importance of having and maintaining connections between children and their family. This research has shown how critical these connections are in a child's recovery from the trauma of removal from their birth family. When relatives are engaged, it increases the likelihood that a child or youth will be placed with a relative. Research tells us that when children must enter foster care, placement with a relative is likely better for children for many reasons. First, there are lower rates of abuse and neglect for children and youth who are placed with relatives as compared to those placed with unrelated foster families. Relative foster placements also tend to be more stable and last longer. Children and youth are more likely to stay connected to their siblings when they are placed with relatives. In addition, connections to community, ethnicity, and culture are more likely to be maintained in relative placements. In general, when placed with relatives, a child or youth's ability to stay connected to the people, places, and things that are important to them is greatly enhanced. This results in a higher likelihood of permanency for youth and children in care. There are some myths that exist in child welfare when it comes to working with relatives. The first myth is that relatives aren't safe. The idea here is that the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree. It may be assumed that if the parents aren't safe, their family members must not be safe either. The fact is, however, that rarely, if ever, is a parent's entire family unsafe. Child welfare practitioners should be encouraged to rule a relative in before ruling a relative out. Information about each relative should be gathered before assumptions are made of whether or not the relative is safe, appropriate, or healthy. Another common myth is that relatives require more work. Imagine that you are able to locate a relative who is not able or suitable to be a placement resource. What if they were, however, appropriate and able to drive the child to appointments, attend school activities, and supervise visitation between the child and other family members? Utilizing relatives in this way may in fact relieve some of the work for the caseworker as well as benefiting the child who remains connected to a family member. Another myth is that distance prevents contact and connection between relatives and children in care. A review of the research does not find this to be true. For example, in one case, an uncle was found in Utah who had never met the child in question. The caseworker engaged him in conversations with the child, progressing from letters to phone calls and emails. Within a few months, the child was invited to spend the holidays with her uncle in Utah. She came back from her visit a changed child with new hopes and dreams for her future. The parents supported this contact, and eventually the child, who had been in foster care for 8 years, was able to move to a permanent placement with her family in Utah. Oregon statute and administrative rule is clear. When children need to be in foster care, the priority is to place them with their relatives and siblings when it is safe to do so. The department must report to the court on their progress in locating relatives for children in foster care. The court then reviews that work and makes either reasonable, diligent, or active efforts findings. Advocates for the child, including relatives, CASAs, and attorneys, can be helpful in supporting the relative search process by keeping it a critical issue. Courts uphold the rules and provide oversight related to the relative search to support positive outcomes for children. Public Law 96-272 is the federal law that gives the department the basis for reasonable, or, when the Indian Child Welfare Act applies, active efforts. Oregon law defines reasonable and active efforts as those efforts made to prevent the removal of children from their home, or when children must enter foster care because of safety reasons, those efforts made to return a child to a parent as soon as safely possible. An important part of meeting a reasonable or active efforts finding in court includes working with relatives and engaging them in supporting the case plan. The Adoption and Safe Families Act established a placement preference for relatives when children need foster care placement. Oregon law requires that diligent efforts be made to identify, locate, and contact relatives to determine their interest in being a placement resource. When children must enter foster care, preference is given to placement with relatives before non-relatives. Concurrent permanency planning requires that an alternate permanency goal be established while working towards reunification for children in foster care more than 60 days. Involving relatives in placement decisions and permanency case planning is vital to ensuring the best possible outcomes for children in care. The federal Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act created a priority of placing siblings together and a mandate for child welfare to notify relatives when children are placed or at risk of placement in foster care. Oregon law requires that diligent efforts be made to place siblings together and to notify relatives when a child is placed or at risk of being placed in foster care. In addition, notification to grandparents and foster parents of court hearings and their right to be heard at court hearings must occur. Relatives play an important role for Native American children as well. The Indian Child Welfare Act requires DHS to provide notice to tribes of all court hearings and to follow a placement preference when children enter foster care. DHS must consider an Indian child's relatives first, then tribal members, and then foster families that have been approved by the child's tribe. This language is embodied in both federal law and Oregon statute. Federal and state laws and Oregon administrative rules require a diligent search for a child's relatives for the purpose of placing a child with relatives and placing siblings together. There are 4 categories in which a person is defined as a relative. First, a person is related to the child through a parent. This includes blood and half-blood relatives with prefixes of grand, great, or great-great, siblings, aunts and uncles, nieces and nephews, first cousins and first cousins once removed, or the spouses of any of those relatives mentioned, or the ex-spouses of any of those relatives mentioned if the child had a relationship with the ex-spouse prior to entering foster care. The second category involves persons distantly related to the child. This includes those persons who the family or child identifies or the person self-identifies as being related to the child by blood, adoption, or marriage, but to a degree other than previously specified. A third category of relatives are individuals with a specific relationship to the child. These include a person defined as a relative by the child's tribe, a person defined as a relative of a refugee child, a child's step-parent or former step-parent if the child had a relationship with the former step-parent prior to entering foster care, a step-brother or step-sister, the domestic partner or former domestic partner of the child's parent if the child had a relationship with the former domestic partner prior to entering foster care, the adoptive parent of a child's sibling, and the unrelated parent of a child's half-sibling if that half-sibling is living with the unrelated parent. The fourth and final category of relatives is persons not related to the child by blood or legal means, but are identified by the child or the family as family members. These people must have an emotionally significant relationship with the child or the family prior to the child entering foster care. Such persons may include godparents, close family friends, and others identified by the child or family. These are individuals who, by the family's, parents, or child's value system, culture, and beliefs, are identified and act as family members. A genogram is a pictorial display of a person's family relationships. It is created with simple symbols representing gender, with various lines to illustrate family lineage. Genograms can be used to help identify relatives. The genogram on the screen displays the child as the bolded circle in the middle of the bottom line. Branching out from the child are extensions of blood and legal relationships that are considered relatives by department policy. These include parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents. In addition, multiple generations are depicted and include relatives that have grand, great, or great-great connections to the child. There are keys to locating relatives at the start of and throughout a child welfare case. Contact with parents, children, and family members is an opportunity to identify relatives and persons with emotionally significant relationship to the child. Information can be gathered during family meetings or through contact with school teachers, child care providers, or a family's spiritual community. Child welfare records should be examined for information pertaining to relative connections. A search of other state database records, such as self-sufficiency, vital statistics, Department of Motor Vehicles, or support enforcement, can be valuable sources of relative information. In addition, there are a number of internet search engines, such as Family Finders and Ancestry.com, that are designed specifically to search for and locate family members. Some individuals are hesitant to reach out to relatives for fear of not knowing what information they can or cannot disclose. Depending on the role of the practitioner, confidentiality standards may be different. In general, it is permissible to share with a relative that a child is in foster care or at risk of being placed in foster care. Relatives may be informed that the department's goal is to manage the needs of a child within the home if possible, and that a relative may be involved in that effort with specific responsibilities. A relative can be informed that they may have a right to be assessed as a potential placement resource for a child unable to remain in the home, And in all cases, relatives should be encouraged as appropriate to contact the department with questions and about ways that they can support a child in foster care. The department's initiatives acknowledge the importance of working closely with relatives. Child welfare is required to ask parents, children, family members, and collateral contacts from day one until the case closes about relatives and other people who are important to the family. The Oregon Safety Model promotes the engagement of relatives in case planning throughout the life of a case. The department may use relatives to keep children safe in their home, serve as an alternate placement resource, or support the child and family in achieving positive outcomes. New adoption rules provide additional focus on relatives and how child welfare must involve them when adoption becomes the permanent plan. Suitable relatives are the preference when considering an adoptive placement. The Safe and Equitable Reduction of Children in Foster Care initiative focuses on improving permanency outcomes for youth in permanent foster care. The initiative highlights the importance of engaging relatives to support and establish connections with youth at risk of aging out of the child welfare system. Oregon recognizes the importance of a child's relationship with family members. The department actively seeks to locate relatives in order to engage them as appropriate in case planning for children in foster care. Identification of relatives is an ongoing process that begins when it is determined that a child is unsafe. The values and principles of family-centered practice provide the framework for conducting relative searches. Engaging relatives to provide culturally responsive safety services, foster care placement options, and ongoing meaningful connections for a child is a critical and necessary effort. There are two lasting bequests we can give our children. One is roots, the other is wings.
Okay, how did you do? Let's test the knowledge. So for finding one, what statements, were all of these statements true? Okay. For the second question, were any of the statements false? Did anybody have a false on any of the statements? Okay.
Make it easier, I could put false so we can talk about it.
Yeah. Were there any common myths about the relatives that didn't make sense to you?
Sure, so I was going to ask, we all see a relative who had a child in foster care, or the grandparents had DHS involvement, and therefore they are not safe. And so I've been told by DHS that relatives aren't safe.
Okay, so maybe safe for...
That seems to be the automatic rule out. If they've
Right.
ever had involvement 25 years ago, that relative is ruled out.
So maybe not safe for placement, but the CRB could follow up on that. What else could the relative be doing? Is the relative safe for keeping connections with going to see a football game? Or, yeah, so there may be other ways that that relative can still be involved.
So I was really asking a question, is that relative always unsafe?
You know, it depends on their criteria. It just depends on DHS criteria. It depends on why they were unsafe in the first place.
Their
And,
children were taken from them.
yeah. And so I'm not sure about that.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to answer that on video. You give the wrong answer. Sure. Yeah, why? Sure.
Often it's just they were ruled. I'm sorry, could we use the microphone so the recording can pick up those?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yes.
One on the stand there.
Thanks for the reminder. Okay, so we'll ask, go ahead and
Did you
ask
have
it again.
a question?
It's okay to ask why, because often they'll just say, well, yes, we considered the grandparent, but they were ruled not appropriate, and it probably shouldn't stop there.
Sure. Yeah, explore that a little bit. What about the federal provisions. Public Law 96272. So what's the description of that? The second one? Okay, great. And the Adoption and Safe Families Act. Okay. And the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act. The only one left. Great, right. Creating a priority. What about question 5? Which of the following individuals were relatives of a child in Oregon's dependency system? All but D&E, correct. And what about the statements under finding 6? Or sorry, under question 6. I'm so used to the findings. Yes. He needs the mic.
I'd like to not rush beyond 5 here for one reason. I was surprised to learn a couple of years ago, I'm a CASA, by the way, this 4th category that isn't on the exam that has to do with persons identified as family by either the family themselves or the child who may not be related by blood, but with whom they have a significant emotional connection.
Right.
That was a big surprise to me. Now, my experience is that most relative searches I see are pretty perfunctory and are exhausted by the time you get down to the end of this list A through F where it's appropriate, but not the other one. And that's a lacuna I've observed, and I never know whether or not it's appropriate for me to say, wait a minute, how do we know there aren't some people? Have you interviewed the child? Have you interviewed neighbors? Have you interviewed the family? Is there somebody else out there? And I have a reason for asking the question, which is that I had a case in which I did some field investigation and found a grandmother of a child. And evidently, DHS didn't know about the grandmother, and nobody ever contacted her until I contacted her. And then I got warned off contacting her because DHS hadn't yet contacted her. And she was very interested in helping nurture this child, but she had already been placed.
The child had already been placed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real issue with a bandwidth of the caseworker on this relative search. I'm just reporting. I don't see it as thorough typically, and I have one case example where I had to be the one to find the grandmother, and it wasn't that tough.
Right, and that's a great point, and it's a good example. And in some of the smaller counties, which you may be part of, DHS may not have had adequate staff. Is that an excuse? No. And the questions that you were asking were appropriate questions that the CRB should be asking.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly. I think the relative search needs to be ongoing throughout the entire case, and I believe it's a collaborative issue between all the parties involved. So it's really important for people like CASA to help out with that.
Right, and not just under the plan of reunification.
But I think there's a really clear distinction. CRB does not, we're not in the business of relative search. We don't have the information, we don't have the authority to go into relative search mode. So that's very distinct from CASA.
Right. But we do have the authority to ask. Pretty soon we're going to point to ask you to pull out a handout that you have in your folder that the courts use to prompt exploring and exploring into relative questions. And they're really a lot of the same questions the CRB should be asking.
Okay, so next we're going to do an activity that will help you learn how to identify a relative. So go ahead and pull out Molly's going to show you the relative definition sheet that you'll pull out. And there's a sheet called the Module 1 worksheet, Search for and Engagement of Relatives. And if you need help finding that, Molly will come around and show you which one that is.
The first handout that you probably want to pull out is the DHS policy. Do you have that? And so this is the policy on who is a relative. And I think if you flip it to number 10, it says relative means. And you can take a quick look at that.
And we'll just give you a couple minutes to review that definition of relative in the DHS policy, and then I'll tell you what we'll do next.
We're just reviewing the policy, right? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, since we're running a little bit behind, we're going to go ahead and have you guys look at the form that says Module 1.
Working with relatives.
Working with
at the front end.
relatives.
It's just a one page, one side.
And what we're going to have you do is in the middle of the page there, it says scenario, and there's a couple of paragraphs there. Go ahead and read that scenario. And then down below where it says questions, it goes on to the back side. There's 4 questions. Go ahead and read that scenario and then answer those 4 questions, and we'll give you some time to do that.
There's just on the first page.
Oh, on their first page.
Yours is just on one page. Yeah.
more time? No? Okay. So what we're going to have you do, we're going to first look at question number 1. If you think the answer is yes, we're going to have you go stand by the yes flip chart in the middle on that side. If you think the answer is no, we're going to have you stand on this side by the no flip chart, and then we'll tell you the correct answer and why. You do your best educated guess.
Is Larry Phelps a relative of Tyson? Yes or no?
All right. So how many of you guys found this more challenging than you thought? Yeah.
Who gets the prize?
Okay, so the answer to number 1 is no, and the reason is Larry Phelps is the father of Tyson's half-sibling Joey. In order for Larry Phelps to be considered a relative of Tyson, Joey would need to be living with Larry Phelps, and he is not.
Okay.
So good job, guys. Okay,
Yeah.
so go ahead and stand where you're at. And okay, so for number 2, is Steve Laurie a relative of Joey? Yes or no?
Do we get a prize?
Anything you want?
Oh, nice.
We get a prize?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That's sweet.
You guys are good. The answer is yes. Steve Laurie is a relative of Joey because Joey's half-sibling Tyson is residing with Steve Laurie. So good job. All
Okay.
right.
Good job.
Okay, so for number 3, is Beverly Phelps a relative of Joey? The answer is
You might want to ask why. Ask them to describe why. Oh, they say yes or no. Ask
okay.
yes,
So
ask
that's
I don't know.
you have to pick a side. Okay, so this is pretty evenly split. So does anyone want to volunteer and say why they chose what they chose?
So under the nose.
Oh, here.
Why? Oh, darn, sorry.
Does anyone want to say why they said no?
Because she didn't have a relationship with him prior to entering care.
Okay, does anyone want to support their yes vote? No? Okay, this is a really tough one. The answer is actually no. And the reason, although Beverly is Joey's stepmother, she would have needed to have a relationship with Joey prior to placement for her to be considered a relative by policy.
Yes.
So that's a tough one.
Yes.
Okay, and the last one that we have,
She's still with Larry, right? So that means she can't be related.
She's never met him. She's never even met Joey.
she had to have a relationship with him prior.
Wouldn't be around providers.
Yeah.
Right.
She's gonna meet him tomorrow.
I can't account for all the scenarios, unfortunately. Okay, and the last one is Richard Christensen, a relative of Joey and Tyson? Yes or no? Yeah?
You're picking up Kempton's bad habit.
It depends because
And this kind of shows me how involved and how complicated the policy is for relatives, and why it's really important for us to be educated, because caseworkers caseworkers may not know the full extent of the policy, so it's really great for you guys to know this. Does anyone want to say why they said yes or no to this one?
Yes. Why did you say yes? Based on?
He is the uncle by marriage.
He's the uncle by marriage? Okay. And how about the no's? What's your reasoning? So they're saying there's no prior relationship.
Okay, and the correct answer is no. And the reason is that Richard Christensen is the spouse of Colleen's sibling, but had no relationship with either boy prior to them entering foster care. So that gives you an idea of what they're looking at.
But you all deserve a prize for... Okay. And then we'll just pass it on to the next table, and they can take what they want.
So before Molly does a short presentation on how this all relates to the findings, I just want to assure you that we are going to get out of here at 4. I know it's the end of the day and the end of the conference, but we'll share with you how this relates to your findings.
How long do we have here? Oh, we should have some music playing or something, right? So when we're talking about diligent efforts for finding 2, you can see that the board ensures that DHS made diligent efforts to place a child with a relative or a person who has a caregiver relationship, and ensures the relative search began the same day the child was placed into care. So persons with a caregiver relationships are those persons who have had physical custody of the child, lived in the same household as the child for specific periods of time. The child must have depended on that relationship to meet the child's needs. The relationship must have existed for at least 12 months immediately preceding the dependency proceeding, for at least 6 months during the dependency proceeding, if that person is a relative, or for half the child's life if the child is less than 6 months of age. So, and this can include an unrelated foster parent, but only when that relationship has been involved for at least 12 months. So under finding 2, one thing, since we are kind of running out of time, just in the essence of time, why don't you pull out the Oregon Judicial Guide to Working with Relatives in Juvenile Court. And like I said before, so first of all, there are 3 kind of summarized categories of who is a relative: blood relatives, relatives not related by blood, other people to consider, so which is kind of that 3rd and 4th category. And then there are just some good prompts of questions that the CRB may want to continue, or may want to ask to explore more relative, diligent relative efforts. So, those are appropriate under finding 2 as well. So you want to make sure that you understand what efforts DHS has made to identify cultural and tribal leaders, assist in the relative search for relatives, including persons with a caregiver relationship. We know that it's a yes finding if the child's already placed with a relative, or if DHS made diligent efforts to place the child with a relative or a person with a caregiver relationship. It's no if you found that DHS really did not make those efforts. And for permanency, so both for finding 2 and finding 5, you want to confirm the relative search has been ongoing. Again, if the child's in a plan of APLA and comes into the review and says, well, we did the relative search, last year we did the relative search, or 2 years ago, and there just aren't any relatives, explore that more. Ask it to go through the file again. Ask the child if there's any adults who even have he has a caregiver relationship with.
Is there a required time frame? Because we always get this, it's an ongoing search.
It is.
For my mic, I was gonna, not sure what I did with the mic.
It's right over here. It's on the
Oh.
stand. So, and that is what so the question is there a time?
Required time that we get an answer if it's a continuing, ongoing search. Well, who does it, when does it happen?
Sure.
It could mean different things to different people, and I'm wondering if there's a specific rule or requirement that a search is done every 6 months, every 6 years, 3 times in the life of the case, or...
So I'm not sure exactly what if there's a requirement the DHS has. Is it at the monthly face-to-face meeting with the child, but it's ongoing, so it's when that case is reviewed, probably on a monthly basis. Are there any new relatives? So, but I'm not sure exactly if there's a policy.
Well, when you say, when was the last time you searched?
Yeah?
It's ongoing. What does that mean?
Is that an acceptable answer as a CRB member from DHS to say it's ongoing? That's too open-ended. Specifically, can you ask when or what did you do? When did you last do it? Show me something you've done. How
Sure.
would you phrase that to them?
I would phrase it just like that. If you feel like you need more specifics, I would ask them.
Just ongoing
Yeah.
doesn't tell
Right.
you anything.
Yeah.
So when was the last time you went through the child's file, if the child's in an APLA plan?
And is it on? Okay.
Oh.
I have 2 questions. So who defines diligent? I mean, I understand the board has a decision to make, but I would say 97% of the time we see cases that come in and you've got maybe 10 relatives and they were the result of a cooperative parent and a state system, and it didn't go further than that. There was no asking the child, no talking to CASA, teachers, whomever. I don't really think that 2 of potentially 30 sources is exactly diligent. And then my second question is related specifically to the finding. I have so many caseworker goes, well, they're with a relative, I don't need to keep searching. But I feel like, yeah, you do, because they need the permanent connections and support. I mean, that's critical to their life. And so I've got them kind of snapping back.
Right. Well, yeah, good for you.
Yeah.
Keep on asking those questions.
As far as diligent, I guess I would just say the board can talk amongst themselves to decide if they feel the efforts have been diligent based on the records and information they've received at the review. And if you're still needing more information, you can always look to the child's attorney and say, do you feel like they've made diligent efforts? And get the child's attorney's input.
So if we're going to end exactly on time, our time is ended.
Thank you for being here.
Sorry we didn't get to complete everything. Thanks, everyone.